Welcome back to the Straight Up Fight Network. What we've been dealing with for the last several years at this point is we have Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler slated to fight at some point in the future. It's been literally years. And it's been super long time since Conor has fought in general. It's been a long time since Michael Chandler has fought, but not quite as long as Conor. And I just want to go through a little bit of history. Let's look back at the career of McGregor and a little bit of a look at the career of Chandler. And let's see, is this even worthy of being excited about this fight at this point? Should it be dominating headlines still? Should we still be remotely excited as fans? Do we even care about this fight? Or is this just something that we should just look past? We don't care if it's on UFC 300. We don't care if it's on UFC anything. And just whenever it happens, it happens. Okay, very good. But it's not something that's actually going to be exciting. So let's look back at all the iterations of Conor McGregor that we've seen since the start of his career. From the beginning of his UFC career, he fought Marcus Brimage. At the very beginning, McGregor, at the 145 weight class, he looked lean and super light on his feet. He looked really as much of a dancer as he did a fighter. He would routinely throw quick spinning kicks. His footwork was a masterpiece. And you could even tell just in the fighting that he was doing in the warm-ups, in the little dancing he was doing before the fight even started, just during the introductions, he looked so light and quick on his feet. He accurately landed against Brimage. Brimage was a shorter, stockier guy, which would be sort of a theme that would come about through much of Conor's career, is fighting guys shorter than him and guys a little stockier than him. Brimage was trying to throw the harder strikes and the crazier shots, but McGregor was able to land quick and sharply, and he was able to put Brimage out of there. His second fight in the UFC was against Max Holloway. And this was one that McGregor took by decision, and it was kind of a sign of things to come for both fighters, right? Holloway didn't get knocked out by McGregor, and he would go on to be one of the most durable fighters in UFC history and a future champion. Then we have McGregor going on to fight Diego Brandao. Brandao got tired pretty quickly into the fight, and Conor looked sharp in the clinch in this fight. He was able to reverse a takedown attempt pretty early in the fight, and he really dominated every area of fighting in this one against Diego Brandao. It was the striking, the wrestling, and the jiu-jitsu, and he just dismantled him. That brings us to the first of 3 fights that McGregor fought against Dustin Poirier. At this point, McGregor looks a little bit more like the McGregor who we know today, with all the tattoos. He got the front chest tattoo, which in his earliest UFC fights, all he had was the, I don't know what you call it, the chain going down his back. But now he has the chest tattoo. And McGregor, in the first matchup against Poirier, he was light years ahead in terms of composure and precision striking. And Poirier realized very quickly in the fight that he was with a fighter who was more confident and who was moving better than him and who was more accurate than him. So it didn't take too long until Poirier started looking nervous and amateurish and fidgety, even more than the typical. Poirier always has a little bit of a fidgety style, but this was more of an unsureness to what he was doing in the cage with McGregor. It became very apparent that he didn't want to take any more shots from McGregor after the first 30 to 40 seconds, after McGregor landed the first of his famous left hands. And the end to that fight was a little weird. McGregor folded Poirier in a strange way very early on. Then you had McGregor go fight Dennis Siver. And just the optics of McGregor versus the way Siver looked was a very stark contrast. McGregor looked like a fit young fighter, and Siver kind of looked like a stocky ex-athlete who you would see, you'd meet at the bar post his UFC career. And there was such a clear and obvious difference in the agility where when McGregor dropped to the canvas, if he slipped, he would quickly spin around and be back up on his feet in fighting stance before you could even blink. Whereas Siver was kind of plodding around and trying to throw hard kicks, and he was trying to decipher, how can I land a shot on this taller, longer fighter? How can I get into range with this guy? Conor's left hand was as sharp as ever, as accompanied by kicks that he was using to find range. And Conor would at this point in his career, he loved the lead uppercut, running in, jumping in with the lead uppercut. And it was actually a left hand to the body that really put Dennis Siver down for the last time. Then McGregor fought his toughest opponent to date, which was Chad Mendes. I know that he fought Poirier and Holloway, but at this point, Chad Mendes was a more experienced, more game opponent than those two. Although, obviously, if you look back at the whole career, you would say Holloway and Poirier were better than Mendes. But, McGregor's toughest fight to date, also against a wrestler. So, at this point, McGregor's hair is overgrown, and he looks like a barbarian. He has that crazed look of insanity on his face as he towers over Mendes with an unkempt and rugged haircut. Mendes was, clearly the most game opponent that he had up to date, and the two were talking the entire first round. And Mendes was actually able to put McGregor on his back 3 separate times in the first round. But anytime McGregor wanted to get up, all he needed to do was get a tiny drop of space, and he was quick enough to jump back up to his feet. Mendes actually hit McGregor with several big shots, including one that bloodied him in the eye. And McGregor spent the entire second round on top of McGregor, but when they stood up at the end of the round, McGregor landed just some vicious, vicious shots. And most importantly, it was a 1-2 that would make Nate Diaz proud, and that really put Mendes out of there. Then we have McGregor's probably his most famous performance ever, which was the Jose Aldo fight. McGregor with all of the build-up, really getting under Aldo's skin, and of course that fight only went 13 seconds, and it was the infamous counterpunch that propelled McGregor to being a superstar. That paved the way for McGregor. He was supposed to fight against RDA, Dos Anjos, and he ended up fighting against Nate Diaz on, 11 days' notice? And this was really where Nate cooked up a recipe. Nate Diaz cooked up the recipe for taking down McGregor, which was take him into deeper waters and test the gas tank. McGregor landed the kitchen sink on Nate early, but Diaz, he has an iron chin, and he was able to take the fight into round 2, where he shifted the tide with his patented 1-2, and he ended it in the choke after the failed desperation shot from McGregor. And then in the rematch against Diaz, it was a fight that I'm not sure Conor really won, but nonetheless, Conor deserved a lot of credit for the way he performed across 5 rounds, attempting to win in a fashion that was really the polar opposite of his typical winning strategy. Usually he tried to land precise shots and get the fighters out of there early. He had a penchant for the knockout. And then in this fight, he knew that he was going to have to go deep with Nate, so he got the victory. Maybe a questionable decision, maybe not. You can pick which side of the equation you want to land on, but he deserves a lot of credit for being able to fight that type of fight for 5 rounds against Nate Diaz, which is the opposite of the way he usually fights. Then you have what most people consider to be McGregor's best performance, in the sense that when McGregor fought Eddie Alvarez, he didn't just knock him out. He didn't just put him out of there. He actually, fought a more complete fight. It took longer, and he just outpointed him in every area. This was where McGregor became the champ, right? He became, he didn't have both titles at the same time, but this is where he became the champ at 155 against Eddie Alvarez. And it was the last fight that he would have in MMA before he did a very polarizing career switch, and he fought a boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. The Mayweather fight went 7 or 8 rounds, and McGregor, for all accounts, he did pretty well. It's hard to ever really know in these boxing matches with Mayweather how much Mayweather was trying. I'm sure Mayweather, if he was aiming for the knockout, could have put McGregor away in any round that he wanted to, but McGregor really did a good showing for himself. And this boxing match really took on a lot of significance in the career for McGregor, both in terms of monetary value, making McGregor richer than he'd ever been, and also in terms of the style shift, with McGregor now leaning into the boxing style and thinking that he's really a professional boxer, but he's really an MMA fighter. So this would really come back to be a questionable decision in McGregor's career. McGregor returned to the UFC for his next fight against Khabib, And this was the totally unfiltered and unleashed McGregor in the absolute grudge match where Khabib took him down and dominated him for a couple of rounds before McGregor achieved a massive moral victory by winning a round against Khabib. And it was, by all accounts, the first round that Khabib had ever lost in his career. And that was before McGregor would eventually blow his wad and get tapped out in the fourth round to more of a neck crank than really a choke. And then, of course, that led to the entire Khabib jumping into the crowd, the eagle soaring and trying to fight Dylan Dennis. So then you have McGregor was out for a little while, and eventually he came back and he had his triumphant return against Donald Cerrone. His triumphant return from a devastating loss from a few years prior, and this was really the perfect matchup, where McGregor seemed like he was the winner of the fight before the fight ever started. Cowboy seemed a little bit enamored by the star power of McGregor and the bright lights of the event, and McGregor tried, and he came out after the fight and he said this. He was going for the quickest knockout in UFC history. He tried for a massive left hand right off of the break and right off the start of the fight, and landed some killer head kicks and the infamous shoulder strikes, which made McGregor look scarier than he ever was before. And it really brought the fans back, because a triumphant return is very, very exciting, because you think, hey, he may never be the same. And when you come back, and not only are you the same, but you show a wrinkle of these shoulder strikes, and you show that you are as versatile and creative as ever, that makes people just their wheels spin, and the minds of the fans start turning and churning, and you just wonder, whoa, what is Conor going to do in this second breath of life after his boxing match? Then you have the second Poirier and third Poirier fight. In the second Poirier fight, where McGregor had the composure advantage and he thrived off of the bright lights, all of that changed here. Poirier was, a veteran's veteran, and he came in not only as a veteran, but also with an exact game plan to take McGregor down early in the first round. He tapped into the Nate Diaz recipe for beating Conor, but where Nate was able to beat Conor by just absorbing damage with his iron chin and taking him into later rounds, Poirier took him into the deeper waters with the takedown. Nobody can just take the shots that Nate can take, but Poirier smartly took Conor down. He neutralized McGregor's greatest strength, which was the early power knockout ability, and he brought them onto equal ground. Poirier took the advantage of the leg kick hole in Conor's game, right? Conor had taken a lot of leg kicks in his career, and perhaps this was amplified by all the boxing training that McGregor was doing, and he became even more susceptible to the leg kick. And when Poirier stung Conor, he knew it. He backed him into a corner, and Poirier was too experienced to be frazzled, and he took those early shots from McGregor, wore them, returned fire, and this culminated in him putting Conor away pretty early in the fight. In the trilogy fight against Poirier, McGregor kind of looked a little bit more like his original self. Granted, he was at a much higher weight than he ever fought before, but he was using the spinning kicks that he showed early in his career, from way back, the earliest points of his career. We anticipated that Poirier may try to take Conor down again, but this time he stayed on his feet, and McGregor went for an early guillotine, which landed him on his back. And he, once he's on his back, Poirier was able to land really punishing elbows for the latter part of the round. McGregor, all the way at the end of the round, stood up, and with a misstep, he broke his leg, ending the fight. And they weren't able to come out for round two. So that is pretty much the career of Conor McGregor up until now. And how about the career of Michael Chandler? Now, we're not going to go through the whole Michael Chandler career the same way that we did for Conor's career, because most of Michael Chandler's career was fought in Bellator. So it's not like, most of us have really watched all those Bellator fights. But you think, wow, Conor, you fought a lot of fights, right? How many fights did Conor McGregor have in his professional career, right? If you start from the UFC fighting, right, before Cage Warriors, and, he had a bunch of Cage Warriors fights too. So he had from the Marcus Brimage, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 was his loss against Nate. 9 was his win against Nate. 10 was his win against Alvarez. 11, 12, 13, 14 by the end of the trilogy with Poirier. So he had 14 MMA fights in the UFC, and then he also had in that span the boxing match against Floyd. So that's 15 fights. And then if you want to include his Cage Warriors fights, which were pretty legitimate fights, he had another 4 Cage Warriors fights, and then a bunch more professional fights before that. So I mean, he's got around 20 or more professional fights before he's slated to fight Michael Chandler. But then when you look at the Chandler side of things, Chandler is actually older than Conor. Chandler's 37. I think Conor's only 35. And Chandler actually has more fights than McGregor. Chandler has over 30 professional fights. If you start from, Chandler was actually all the way back in Strikeforce. So Chandler fought 2 Strikeforce fights, and then he fought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights in a row. He got 9 victories in a row to start off his Bellator career, including wins against Patricky Freire and also against Eddie Alvarez. Then he went on to lose to Eddie Alvarez in a rematch by split decision, and then he lost 2 fights in a row to his kryptonite, Will Brooks. Then he rattled off 4 victories in a row, including another victory over Patricky Freire and a victory over Benson Henderson. Then he lost to Brent Primus, then won 3 fights in a row, including the redemption against Brent Primus in the rematch. Then he lost to Patricio Pitbull, then won 3 fights in a row, including a knockout victory against Benson Henderson. So he's 2-0 against Benson Henderson. And then he won his first fight in the UFC with the spectacular knockout against Dan Hooker right at the beginning of the fight, where he landed a brutal leg kick, a brutal punch to take Dan Hooker out real quickly. Then he had back-to-back losses where he lost to Charles Oliveira for the UFC title, where he nearly knocked out Oliveira in the first round and then came back to lose the second round. And then we have Justin Gaethje beating Michael Chandler in the 3-round unanimous decision, which was just one of the more wild fights you'll ever see in your life. Then we have him beating Tony Ferguson with the absolutely spectacular front kick KO, one of the best knockouts any of us have ever seen. And then he had a loss to Dustin Poirier, where this was really a pretty wild fight, where Chandler had Poirier badly hurt against the fence in round 1, and then when he was about to put Poirier away, he, in a mind-boggling, horrible decision, he went for a takedown, and instead of ending the fight on the feet, where he was literally one good punch away from ending a badly hurt Poirier, he goes for the takedown and allows Poirier to recover. What was hilarious about this was that if you watch back that fight, Cormier yells joyously about how smart it was for Chandler to go for the takedown. Even though it was a horrible decision, because instead of ending the fight, he allowed Poirier to recover completely. Chandler then slams Poirier with a massive takedown, further depleting his diminishing gas tank. Poirier, back to his senses, clocks Chandler with a massive left hook, drops him, and then batters him with more clean shots against the cage and lands a hellacious elbow at the buzzer. And Chandler was saved by the bell. In round 2, Poirier exploded Chandler's nose, and there was a lot of back and forth regarding how Chandler was kind of blowing blood into the face of Poirier, and they go back and forth about that, and Poirier accused Chandler of a fishhook, and Chandler spent the rest of the round on top and on Poirier's back, leaking blood all over him. Chandler had another massive slam in round 3, and then he lost the position as he was going to the ground. Poirier took Chandler's back and ended the fight with a choke. So a really crazy fight, a fight consisting of several really poor decisions by Chandler. The big slams, which depleted his gas tank, going for a takedown when he had Poirier basically done, and then going for another big slam in the 3rd round, further ruining the gas tank and setting Poirier up to beat him with the choke. So a lot of suspect decisions from Michael Chandler. So let's try to, is this a fight that we should be really looking forward to? Conor, with his massively long career, at this later stage of his career, going against Michael Chandler. So if we look on the Conor side, we have Conor had a really long career. A lot of wear and tear. Okay, but Chandler had an even longer career, and Chandler is even older than Conor. But then if you go back to the Conor side, you also have drugs, alcohol, and significant injuries. We have the leg break and other injuries as well for Conor. You also can throw in there that Conor is busy filming movies and he became ridiculously wealthy. So all of these are factors which Conor has to deal with and navigate that Chandler doesn't have to deal with. Conor, if you try to look at the pro side of things, Conor has experience with longer layoffs. And I'm not sure that Chandler really has the experience with not fighting and then coming back after that long period of inactivity. So maybe that's an advantage for Conor. Conor also has more experience at the 170-pound weight class, which is likely where their fight will take place. Whereas Chandler, he's really, really, really powerful, but with the extra weight, how is that going to impact him? And not fighting, the weight, is Chandler going to look as good as he usually does? He's usually, in terms of being an athlete, he's at the top of the elite, or being an elite athlete and being in shape. Conor also has in his favor that he likes fighting shorter fighters. And historically, he's done great against guys like Alvarez, Brimage, Seaver, the shorter guys. Even Aldo was shorter than him. Almost everyone Conor beat was shorter than him, maybe with the exception of Cerrone and Poirier. And then you have on both sides, they both like to start fast. So would that favor either one of them? Who knows? Conor likes to get the early knockout, and so does Chandler. They also competed on a season of The Ultimate Fighter as coaches, where I'm typically a big fan of The Ultimate Fighter. I actually really enjoy watching it. I like to watch it with my wife, but we started watching that and we didn't even end up finishing the season. I don't know why. I think it just was so not intriguing that we ended up just watching other stuff, and I don't even know who won the season. So let's try to take everything into account, and should we be looking forward to this matchup? Should we care that it's always in the headlines? What are we really looking forward to here with these two older fighters? And when I started this exercise, I really thought that I was going to come out and say, who cares about this fight? Conor is just going to get blown out. But I mean, if you really look at all the details, McGregor has had a longer career than Conor, and the inactivity and the waiting game, where now Michael Chandler is going to be 37. You think maybe he's going past his breaking point? Maybe the extra time for McGregor just gives him more time to heal, and it does better for McGregor than it does for Chandler. And in McGregor's favor, the time off starts to work in his favor, whereas for Chandler, maybe he's getting a little bit too up there in age. Maybe the inactivity is better for Conor, who's dealt with that sort of thing in his career, and Chandler hasn't. Or maybe Conor's just too brittle at this point. Maybe he'll just get injured again in the fight. Hard to really know. But I actually would say, I am pretty excited for this fight whenever it happens. I mean, I'm not going to pay attention to the headlines and discuss Mike Chandler and Conor McGregor ad nauseum like all of these channels do. No, I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to wait. I did this one exercise of trying to see if we should really even be paying attention to when the Chandler-McGregor fight will happen. And regardless of when it happens, I'm actually really going to be looking forward to it. I think that both of these guys being similar in age actually keeps the excitement, because even if they're a little past their prime, they should be on even playing ground. So that is a reason for me to be excited, and I think we should all be excited about it. And you know what? That's how we're going to analyze it and look forward to it at the Straight Up Fight Network. And for the Straight Up Fight Network, we're out.